There's a lot happening on the international front this week, so much so that the U.S. strikes on Syria seem like almost a distant memory, which feels like a problem. And then there's the administration infighting over Russia sanction, with the ambassador to the UN, Nikki, declaring over the weekend that Russian sanctions were imminent, and then the White House turning around and undercutting her. Plus, there's that historic meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong Un, also looming, which Donald Trump seems almost eager about.
Hopefully that meeting will be a great success, and we're looking forward to it. It would be a tremendous thing for North Korea and a tremendous thing for the world. We will not repeat the mistakes of previous administrations.
And he's already choreographed his possible moves.
If I think that it's a meeting that is not going to be fruitful, we're not going to go. If the meeting, when I'm there, is not fruitful, I will respectfully leave the meeting.
President Trump also confirmed that Secretary of State nominee Mike Pompeo, the guy senators are lining up to oppose in that job, met with Kim a few weeks ago. And there are some signs that some may consider to be hopeful. Today, North Korea is reported to have dropped its long-held demand that U.S. troops leave South Korea in exchange for the North ending its nuclear program. So, is the tough talk working? I'm joined now by retired Army Colonel Andrew Bacevich. It's very good to see you. Thanks for being here. Can we start big picture and go small? You've written and noted that the president seems to have very little respect for the foreign policy infrastructure, the establishment. Does that put him at such a disadvantage that it's almost impossible to climb out of that hole, especially since he has no foreign policy experience?
Well, yes and no. I mean, if one sees the foreign policy establishment as a great reservoir of wisdom that a president should draw upon, he's not doing that. He's flying solo. On the other hand, if you think that, particularly, let's say, since 9/11, that the foreign policy establishment has not exactly distinguished itself, then you could make an argument that an unorthodox approach by an independent thinker could yield positive results.
And you fall into that second category.
I'd like to think I do. I don't think that the president does.
Well, speaking of the president, is there a Trump doctrine? You also write that, what was it, that during the campaign, it was sort of a win or bolt strategy that he was espousing. Is there, in 14 months, have you been able to discern a doctrine that is a thread through whatever he's been doing?
I would say absolutely not. There is a document called the National Security Strategy of the United States, issued over his signature, drafted by the National Security Council, basically the handiwork of H.R. McMaster. It's not a particularly good document, but it purports to be a strategy. Of course, since it came out, he gave H.R. McMaster the heave-ho, and it really seems to me that we've got a guy who, we've seen it time and again, he acts on impulse. He basically takes the advice of the last person he talks to, and goes with that. So I don't see anything coherent.
But isn't it possible that his impulses, to use your word, on North Korea may have been right? Whether it's sanctions, whether it's Little Rocket Man or other demeaning terms, is it not possible that he forced Kim to the table in a way that might produce something?
Yes, it's theoretically possible. And if the president brings peace to Korea, then by golly, I'll be the first one to stand up and say, award this man the Nobel Peace Prize.
You don't think that's about to happen?
I don't think it's about to happen. Why is that? I have not seen any evidence that the president has a worldview. I mean, a principled understanding of how the world works and a considered understanding of the role that the United States ought to play in that world. And the world, of course, is rapidly changing, that world order, and I don't think he really has a grasp of any of that.
Well, let me make the argument that for 10 days he had a worldview. His worldview was embraced in Syria, where he said, I think it was on April 3rd, I'm going to get out of there, essentially. I'm going to get out of there. And that, of course, was until he did an airstrike. The get out of there part of Donald Trump, which to me was what I heard on the campaign trail. It's sort of the winter bolt thing, I guess you were talking about. That is something you would embrace, is it not?
I wish that we could have a serious conversation, a Republican presidential candidate versus a Democratic presidential candidate, where we would have a serious evaluation between the merits of continuing with this global leadership project, which has us engaged in war all over the place, and an alternative that posited a more realistic, more modest approach to the world, a more modest sense of what military power can achieve. And you're right, when he made that, I think typically off the cuff, unscripted remark saying, I want to pull out of Syria, and as soon as he said that, he followed that with a comment that placed Syria in a larger context. He said, we've been fighting in that part of the world for 17 years. He said it's cost us $7 trillion, which is a reasonably accurate estimate. And he went on to say, we've gotten nothing out of it. Now,
you could have said those same words, could you not? I'm serious. No, I'm serious. Is that not fair?
I think it's fair. But the point there would be, if that's true, we've gotten nothing out of it for $7 trillion, and I think it's true. Well, now let's talk about alternatives. Let's talk about what can be done. But of course, then when Assad did his atrocious chemical attack, the conversation immediately shifted away. What might an alternative foreign policy look like? And now it became the next sort of punitive effort.
Well, you know, one of the problems, I think you touched on, I mean, it does change every day. I mean, we had Nikki Haley saying sanctions will be imposed tomorrow, meaning Monday. The next day, Larry Kudlow, his economic advisor, said she was a little bit confused. And then I think the line of the month, as far as I'm concerned, her response was, with all due respect, I don't get confused. But my problem is in a different place, Andrew Bacevich. My problem is the people we elect to either be a counterbalance, if that's the right word, on anything a president does in this front, are as meek as the meekest people on the planet. What short of a draft would convince the 535 men and women in Congress that they should do their job when any president, this president, Obama, anybody else, gets us entangled in foreign affairs?
I think the only thing would be that those of us who elect the 535 stand up and say we've had enough of this fiasco. And indeed, in some respects, that's what happened in 2016. I mean, the people who were fed up not simply with unwinnable wars, but fed up with other policies coming out of Washington and said, we're done with this. Alas, the only alternative they had was Donald Trump as a vehicle to express their unhappiness.
We only have 30 seconds left. Can you give him 30 seconds of advice? I mean it, considering where you think his head is, and I happen to think his head is an anti-interventionist head, whether it's well thought out or not. Give him 30 seconds of advice before we leave.
Well, he needs a better team than he has, a better team than people like John Bolton as National Security Advisor, better than Pompeo if he's confirmed as Secretary. And he needs to learn to thoughtfully listen to his team, to preside over a serious debate over policy options rather than just getting up in the morning and shooting off his mouth in some tweet.
Andrew Bacevich, thank you very much. It's good to see you as always.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your time.